Hi everyone and welcome. Today I'm going to talk to you about a very common practice in ancient Egypt. So today's video is going to be about Egyptian mummification. Mummification was a widespread practice in ancient societies, and ancient Egypt is among the first civilizations to mummify the dead. First and foremost, mummification was a sacred ritual in ancient Egypt, and the ancient Egyptians were obsessed with death, and they had a strong and firm belief in life after death. So this fervent belief in the hereafter drove the Egyptians to construct elaborate tombs for the pharaohs and members of the royal family. Mummification would keep the dead body intact, and it would preserve the facial traits and features of the deceased person, and it would enable the deceased person to join the next world and to meet the gods. So how was the process of mummification carried out? Mummification would last approximately 70 days, and it was performed by priests and specialists who had a great and detailed knowledge of the human anatomy. So during the process of mummification, the priests would recite sacred words, and they would normally be wearing masks which represent Anubis, who is the god of mummification and embalming. The priests would start the process of mummification by removing the brain through the nostrils using an iron hook. Then they would make an incision in the abdomen and start removing the internal organs such as the liver, the stomach, the lungs, and then they would cleanse the abdomen cavity using palm wine, and they would fill the abdomen cavity with aromatic spices and herbs. The internal organs were generally kept in alabaster jars and boxes, because they would eventually be buried with the pharaoh. After that, the body of the pharaoh would be completely covered in natron, which would absorb or remove all the moisture present within the body. So after 40 days, the priests would remove the natron from the pharaoh's body, and the process of wrapping would start. So they would generally use linen bandages and perfumed oil and resin to make sure that the bandages are properly fixed onto the body. And finally, the priests would put the mummy of the pharaoh in a sarcophagus, and they would bury it in a tomb with all the treasures and the personal belongings that the pharaoh will need in the hereafter. Mummification was a relatively expensive practice in ancient Egypt, and not everyone could afford it, so it was more like a luxury, and only the pharaohs, the members of the royal family, the nobles, and the richest people could be mummified. The ancient Egyptians mummified not just the pharaohs and the members of the royal family. Even animals were sometimes mummified because they were thought to provide food in the afterlife. They were also thought to serve as religious offerings for the gods. However, the most important reason behind animal mummification in ancient Egypt was that some animals were often associated with some Egyptian divinities, such as Horus, the falcon-headed god, Bastet, the cat-headed goddess, and Thoth, the ibis-headed god. So in this National Geographic magazine, there is, as you can tell, an article which is about animal mummification in ancient Egypt. So I'm going to read you a very short passage from this National Geographic article. Okay. In 1888, an Egyptian farmer digging in the sand near the village of Estab Antar uncovered a mass grave. The bodies were not human. They were feline, ancient cats that had been mummified and buried in pits in staggering numbers. Not one or two here and there, reported the English Illustrated magazine, but dozens, hundreds of thousands. Those were the days of generously funded expeditions that dredged through acres of desert in their quest for royal tombs and for splendid gold and painted masks and coffins to adorn the estates and museums of Europe and America. Today, the animal mummies are one of the most popular exhibits in the whole treasure-filled museum. Visitors of all ages, Egyptians and foreigners, press in shoulder to get a look. And that will conclude today's video. If you guys have any questions, don't hesitate to ask them. And thank you so much for your attention.